I'm actually very honored to be here tonight to accept this award. 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I came to the first of the Porras dinners organized by Mantle acknowledging Fernando Insunza. And over the years, I've participated in most of these events. I've come to appreciate the contribution of other Hispanic GSB alumni to Stanford, the business community, and the community at large. And I'm frankly overwhelmed to be counted in that group. Before I go on, I need to acknowledge some of the people who got me to this place. The members of my family who could be here tonight, my sister Catherine and brother-in-law Keith Brewer. Thank you for coming. And most importantly, my wife Francoise. We actually had our wedding reception here. The conga line went somewhere through those tables. Really, success in life is built on partnerships that you build, and I couldn't have chosen a better partner in Francoise for my life. And through 19 years of marriage, we've shared the ups and downs of careers, have built a family with 2 great kids, Alejandro and Ariana, who are at home tonight with their abuela. And I'd also like to acknowledge 2 members of the GSB community who've meant a lot to me. The first, the mentor of many Hispanic students at the GSB is Jerry Porras, for whom this award is named. Jerry is not able to be here tonight to join us for this dinner, but he's with us in spirit. His work in Built to Last and his other academic work was a touchstone for best practices in business management, and in my firm became one of the tomes or required reading of senior management at Stone and Youngberg. And I'll actually let you in on one secret. When I was at the GSB, Jerry Porras taught interpersonal dynamics, which many of you know as touchy-feely. And he actually was the head of the section in my class. And so I ended up with him as the direct contact for that program. And at the Pajaro Dunes retreat, I realized that Jerry was really more than an accomplished academic. We all knew that. He was a caring human being. And through that, I took away the lesson that the skills of a professional can also include compassion, caring, and attention to the needs of others. The other person I'd like to acknowledge is Professor Jim Van Horn, who's retiring, as you know, from the faculty after 42 years of service to this community. Thank you, Professor Van Horn. I've had the honor of serving as a guest lecturer for a few of his classes, and from the perspective of someone who's now 2 decades out of the GSB, I can appreciate the question that he would ask at the end of a case review: what is the decision here? Where he would point to different members of a class and ask them for that response. And that's the choice that confronts us in business every day. I can also say, in watching the response to the cold calls during one of his case discussions, that I could envision a new reality TV show. And I think I'd call it Fear Factor meets High Finance. I wish you well, Professor Van Horn. One aspect of the Porras Award dinner that I've observed over the years is the story related by each recipient of the award. I still remember how Richard Leza, Julia Sullivan, Frank Ramirez related the stories of their lives before and after the GSB. My story lacks the drama of others, but it is still part of the American story, and it begins with my grandfather. Jose Cervantes came to this country from León, Mexico, 100 years ago, looking for El Dorado. In his case, it wasn't the quest of a conquistador, but a search for a better life. He worked as a migrant worker and eventually found a job as a lineman for the Rock Island Railroad. In those days, keeping the tracks aligned required physical labor, and those laborers were often immigrants. My grandfather built his own house, literally a shack, next to the railroad tracks in Eldon, Iowa. It was a small corner of Mexico in rural America, a place without running water or electricity. And, visiting as a child in the 60s, I learned the joys of an outhouse in the hot Iowa summer. My father grew up in 2 worlds. With his sisters, they spoke Spanish at home, but crossed into the land of English once the gate closed behind them. My dad tells me that he enjoyed his childhood, but it was a very poor existence and a very difficult one at that. World War II changed all that. With the war, my father enlisted in the Army and signed up for the Army Air Corps. It's safe to say that few others in my dad's hometown, including his own father, thought he'd be successful. As my dad progressed through flight school in the latter days of the war, the Army became very selective in terms of who it would keep or who it would cut in the program. Cadets could be cut for almost any reason, but my father kept at it as other cadets around him were washed out. And I think this experience shaped my dad a good deal. He would relate stories to us as children of other individuals who did not make the cut, like a cadet who took too long to eat his meals and held up the rest of his squadron at a mess hall. I'm actually looking around now just to see who still hasn't finished dinner. You might get cut from the program too. My father earned his wings as a fighter pilot right at the end of the war, one of a handful of Mexican Americans to become pilots in that era. Some years ago, I actually met another Latino pilot of the war, and his name, coincidentally, was also Cervantes. I would kind of wonder if Ken Burns might want to put that in his updated documentary of the war. Well, my dad didn't fight combat in World War II. He made a career as a pilot in the Air Force, with a hiatus for college in the GI Bill. He served in the occupation in Japan, the Korean conflict, and eventually in Vietnam. And for my father, the military provided a place where, if you did your job right, you would eventually get rewarded. For him, El Dorado was in the skies, flying an aircraft for his country. And I'm proud to say that I am the product of a military family. My mother was a Navy nurse when she met my father, and we grew up on or near Air Force bases. In the military, families move every 2 years. We were migrant workers for Uncle Sam. But it was a good childhood. We lived that way until my father retired after 25 years of service at the ripe old age of 45. Unfortunately, soon after his retirement, my mother died of cancer, and so they were unable to spend a post-military life together. You learn things from your parents, and I appreciate this now more fully now that I'm older and also a father. In this case, the lessons I learned from my father relate to setting high goals, being determined to achieve them, and keeping perspective in the process. And over the years that she fought cancer, my mother taught me the importance of faith and working through adversity with grace. Through my parents, I grew up with a notion of giving back to society, and as a result, I've always gravitated towards the field of community development. After college, I received a fellowship with the Coro Foundation for their Public Affairs Leadership Program. I'm a supporter of Coro's hands-on leadership training and now serve on the board of directors. Through Coro, I also interned with a nonprofit housing development corporation in San Francisco's Mission District. I went on to spend the next 4 years there working with them to provide affordable housing for a diverse mix of low-income seniors and families. I came to the GSB to broaden my perspective and my options. And through the GSB, I discovered the field of public finance. Public finance is the place where investment banking meets the public sector. Much of the infrastructure we see around us, our schools, our roads, our public buildings, and the infrastructure that we don't see, our water, wastewater, electric systems, were built by bonds. These bonds were issued by public agencies over the past century, representing the legacy of prior generations for our benefit. Today, many of the facilities on the Stanford campus were also built using tax-exempt bonds. I've worked in this field now for nearly 21 years with the same firm that I joined after joining the GSB, which made me somewhat of an anomaly at our 20th reunion last fall. And I've stayed with public finance as I love the challenge of a transaction. It's pulling together a group of individuals to achieve an objective. And I found great satisfaction navigating the constraints of available revenues, state law, federal tax code restrictions, and public agency objectives to come to an outcome. One of my favorite engagements actually was an 18-mile water transmission pipeline that we built for Amador County, which is in the Sierra foothills. That really isn't unusual in itself, but this pipeline replaced a 19th century open ditch that represented the county's water supply system. So you can do things in this field that really makes a difference for people. In communities like Sacramento, Riverside, Salinas, we've worked to fund the roads, schools, water lines, storm drains, and basic infrastructure that now constitute the backbone of new communities. And I'd argue that one of America's competitive strengths is in its infrastructure. We take this for granted here, but there are many other countries lack the basic access to clean water and roads. To the extent that we continue to invest in infrastructure, whether it's the Alameda Corridor in Los Angeles, the Bay Bridge retrofit, or a public Wi-Fi system, we maintain our advantage. However, we have to recognize that the state and much of the country has been coasting on a legacy of infrastructure that was installed a generation ago and is now wearing out. You'll remember that Governor Schwarzenegger proposed $47 billion of bonds in the prior November ballot. Relative to California's needs, that really doesn't get the job done, and you will see $1 billion more of bonds on future ballots. On the local level, there are billions of dollars more in need, but we haven't found a good way to fund it, given California's 2/3 voter requirement threshold. So there's a lot to do in public finance. And for those of you who like the challenges of investment banking, but enjoy dealing with public policy, I'd recommend this field for your consideration. And as a personal plug, I'd be delighted to talk to any MBA who'd be interested in considering public finance as a career. One way we remake communities is through our ongoing personal involvement. On every trip back to the GSB, I've been astounded by the energy and creativity of the people here and in working with organizations that benefit others, whether it's the Challenge for Charity, the Stanford Management Internship Fund, the I Have a Dream program, and many others. Given the academic load here, I'm amazed how you MBAs pull it off. And once you leave this place, I encourage you strongly to keep up the effort. We're in a privileged place here. There is a significant achievement gap between Hispanics and the general population in California. Too few Latinos graduate from high school or move on to college. Few members of the Latino community have the opportunity to attend an institution like the Stanford GSB. For those of us who are alumni, and for those of you who are in the program here, we are privileged. Many of you in this audience have faced hardships and challenges to get to this place. We represent a great hope for the Latino community. We can play a role in making our community stronger. I talked earlier of public infrastructure, but in reality, infrastructure goes beyond concrete and steel. It's the human talent that we have in this state and in this country that is the foundation of our success. With so much of the world torn apart by ethnic division, we have a chance in California and in the United States to build a society where each group makes a contribution and lives in peace with the society at large. This has been the genius of America. In California now, we're living this vision in full, as no single ethnic group now represents the majority. Over the past 2 decades of my career in public finance, I've seen the growing presence of Latinos in position of political influence. Where there were few, there are now hundreds of Hispanic city council members. A new Latino mayor of Los Angeles for the first time in over a century, and a growing Latino caucus in our state capital. You will likely see an Hispanic governor of California within the next few election cycles. But we still have a long way to go as a community. For those of you who will graduate from the GSB in a few weeks or in a year, I encourage you to take on the mantle of leadership in our community, whether that's through building a company that provides opportunities, or through service on a nonprofit board, or through community activism, or through all those things. I've seen the talent and the potential of the GSB. You can make a disproportionate impact. And so, to the MBA candidates here, whether you know it or not, You bear the hopes and aspirations of a growing and emerging Hispanic community in this state and in this country. May you find success and fulfillment in your careers and in your lives of public service. And I wish you all well in your own search for El Dorado.